recent years. It was quite something. Azim Rafiq's brutal, heartfelt, emotional and at times tearful testimony today really took your breath away.
There was comments such as, "You lot sit over there near the toilets, elephant washers, no one ever stamped it out."
It was hard not to sit there and wonder, what is wrong with this country and what on earth is going on in the world of cricket? Also on News at 10 tonight. It's not exactly taking back control. Dan has an astonishing day witnessing the migrants streaming across the channel as the French police smoke and wander about a bit.
Asia Business Report, I'm Karishma.
There is not a single policeman around here. They've waited till it's daylight and we've probably got 50, I would guess, migrants, many of them who claim they're from Iraq, determined to cross the world's busiest shipping lane.
The PM tries to get on the front foot over sleaze. It's a bold announcement on second jobs, but is it a recipe for years of chaos and confusion? Queen Rania tells Chris that climate change is such a threat to her country the River Jordan may soon run dry. And
was a man who thought he was a loner, but he knew it couldn't last.
the glory of the Beatles before their acrimonious split.
They were extremely culturally significant. You know, we came after, but
they changed the world. And I know people say that, but if you think about it, they did.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. For years, the former Yorkshire spin bowler Azim Rafiq had nowhere to turn. Today, in front of MPs, he outlined a lifetime of being racially abused within the sport of cricket. He called it inhuman, in evidence tinged with tears. It started way before he was signed by Yorkshire. As an aspiring 15-year-old in club cricket, he was forced, against his religion, to drink wine. When he was signed at 17, he said he joined a dressing room full of his heroes. But from pretty early on, the racist remarks by those who played the game and those who ran it began. He was scathing about the English Cricket Board and the Players' Union, both of whom he turned to, and teammates who looked the other way. He mentioned the current England Test captain, Joe Root. Mr. Rafiq said it shows how normal racism is when even a good man like him didn't see it for what it was.
The day cricket hung its head in shame. For a long time, no one listened to Azim Rafiq. Now everyone is, as he recounts a harrowing catalogue of racism he suffered at the hands of his Yorkshire teammates.
There was comments such as, "You lot sit over there near the toilets, elephant washers." The word was used constantly, and there just seems to be an acceptance in the institution from the leaders, and no one ever stamped it out.
Rafiq told MPs he decided to expose what was going on when he was offered little support following a personal tragedy, the stillbirth of his first son.
I've just carried my son from the hospital to the graveyard, and how I'm getting treated here is not right. And to me, it became very clear that even myself, that I'd been looking the other way. And there's a real problem here, not just Yorkshire, throughout the country. And I'm going to be the one that's going to speak about this.
When the cricket club investigated Rafiq's claims, it found racial harassment not an institutional problem. No one was disciplined. During his evidence, Rafiq accused England player Gary Ballance of calling all non-white players by the name Kevin. Former England captain Michael Vaughan has denied making a racist comment to a group of Asian players. Rafiq said today Michael might not remember it because it doesn't mean anything to him. And then there is the current England Test captain Joe Root, who said last week he was unaware of any racist behaviour at Yorkshire.
Root was involved before he started playing for England. He was involved in a lot of them socialising nights out where I'd been called the but again, it just shows, and he might not remember it, but it just shows how normal it was in that environment.
At times, Rafiq says he was suicidal. He begged the sports governing body, the ECB, for help. But despite his desperation, he says They said they couldn't interfere.
If someone else had told me that they were suicidal, and then he was ringing you saying, please help, I'd forget the Constitution and any regulatory, and I'd jump straight in and go, right, we need to help the human, because it left me over the winter. There's been some really dark moments.
Rafiq says he's now determined to turn his pain into a positive legacy.
I'm a massive believer everything happens for a reason, and like I said, hopefully in 5 years' time we're going to see a big change, and I can look back at it that I did something that is far bigger than any runs I got or any wickets I got. But yeah, it's horrible, it hurts.
The man who resigned as Yorkshire's chairman over the crisis said when he tried to do the right thing recently, he was blocked at every turn.
There was a clear resistance to see Azim as the victim, a clear resistance to apologise.
When challenged today, the ECB defended its anti-racism and diversity strategy, but admitted rolling it out had not been effective.
What we have struggled with is getting our first-class game to wake up to the same extent. And that is the point. That is, we are at that stage now where I think we are, if not already in an emergency, then we are approaching one.
An emergency, yes, but thanks to Azim Rafiq's bravery, it's undoubtedly a turning point too.
And Steve is here to talk about all this. Look, you kind of said it yourself, the day that cricket hung its head in shame. I mean, it has revealed a kind of pattern of racism within the sport.
It was devastating testimony, wasn't it, Tom? And while obviously Yorkshire and many of its staff were the main targets, cricket and its leadership didn't escape either. I mean, apart from Azim Rafiq's conclusion that he lost his career due to racism, which is terrible enough, I think if you had to crystallise what he was saying today, it wasn't just about the overt racism, the direct racism that he suffered, but it was this subtle abuse that seemed to be meted out on a daily basis in the dressing room, so ingrained that, as we've just heard, Joan Root, for example, who Rafiq clearly likes and respects, couldn't recall any of it. As Rafiq said today, it was just normalised. There were the racists and then there were bystanders. And this is what cricket faces at the moment. They have to get rid of the racists and they have to encourage the bystanders to act immediately. The sport's, in a way, fighting for its reputation tonight and has an awful lot of work to do, I think, if it has to convince everybody that it is a sport welcome for all. And that has to start with the game's governing body, the ECB, and its leadership. Azim Rafiq, his bravery really has handed them a very significant challenge tonight, and we'll all be watching to see if they're up to it.
OK, Steve, what a sorry episode it's been, but for now, thank you very much indeed. Now, a couple of years ago, filming a dinghy full of migrants setting off across the Channel from northern France was really difficult, such was their secrecy. But today, in broad daylight, we filmed as one was launched out in the open from a beach there. And it was not alone. It is estimated 50 dinghies made the crossing today. At the time, there wasn't a French police officer in sight. Later, a few turned up, smoked and wandered around a bit. You might call it just a tiny bit farcical.
Jubilant as they emerge from the dunes with a craft that dwarfs
Coming
them.
up on tonight's
This is the
ITV
moment
Live,
these migrants
mandatory.
realise nothing now stands in their way. Children are carried as the men surge forward with the dinghy. It's not easy, but the momentum is now unstoppable.
Are you worried? Are you scared? You have
No,
kids?
I'm not scared.
No?
Inshallah, bi'idhnillah.
How long have you been in France?
I 7 years in France.
7 years?
5 years prison.
He may have been in prison, but these Iraqi Kurds think freedom lies just over the channel. Spaces on the boat are limited. Women and children go first, then an undignified scramble.
This launch is utterly brazen. There is not a single policeman around here. They've waited till it's daylight, and we've probably got 50, I would guess, migrants, many of them who claim they're from Iraq, determined to cross the world's busiest shipping lane. The boat is full, but this man is determined not to miss his chance. Eventually, his fellow passengers do make room, but there are some left on the beach, perhaps with the smugglers who organised this voyage. As the dinghy disappears into the fog, we spot another boat launching further down the beach. The migrants know once they are afloat, the French authorities are powerless to stop them under international maritime law. The police eventually show up an hour after the boats have departed, and there appears to be little urgency to their patrol. But mid-channel, a fisherman manages to film some of the growing armada of boats heading for the UK. Many are intercepted and the passengers taken aboard Border Force cutters and brought into Dover. Others were helped to safety by lifeboats, some finding themselves on a remote beach in Kent, hoping their dreams of a new life here will be borne out. The resources devoted each day to this crisis are bewildering. Despite the promises of both French and British governments to stop 100% of these crossings, the reality today seemed a very long way from that goal. Dan Rivers, News at 10 in the Pas-de-Calais.
Well, they are frankly astonishing images. Now, police investigating the explosion of a homemade bomb outside Liverpool's Women's Hospital say they have made significant progress, but it could take them many weeks to understand exactly what happened. The suspected terrorist, Ahmad al-Swilman, who died in the explosion, is reported to have had an asylum claim rejected 7 years ago. Some politics now, and I think it is fair to say the sleaze row has been a bit of a disaster for the government. It has split the party and hit them where it hurts, in the polls. So today, the Prime Minister tried to get on the front foot with an announcement that he wants updated and tougher rules on MPs with second jobs. So far, so good, you might say, but then it starts to get really complicated, which we'll come to in a moment. His timing was interesting too. He published his plan just as the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, started setting out what he would do.
The last 3 weeks have been shameful for this House.
He's opened a Pandora's box of Tory sleaze.
Members of Parliament must uphold the highest standards in public life.
2 weeks of talking about this, and only now are we getting closer to a conclusion. This morning, as ministers left Cabinet, House Secretary, shouldn't the government apologise for the way it's dealt with this? The questions around sleaze had still not gone away. The Prime Minister has now taken the action that many have been calling for. He has written to the Speaker of the House of Commons, asking to change MPs' code of conduct. In his letter, he outlined specific recommendations, including that any outside activity undertaken by an MP should be within reasonable limits, and that MPs should not accept any paid work to provide services as a parliamentary strategist, advisor or consultant. The letter goes on and says adopting these specific recommendations would ensure that MPs who are neglecting their duties to their constituents would be investigated and appropriately punished.
The Prime Minister is clear that the primary role of a Member of Parliament must be to serve their constituents and to serve Parliament. And that's why the Prime Minister is calling for the Code of Conduct to be tightened so that that is made very clear to Members of Parliament moving forward, and that on a cross-party basis, through the leadership of the Speaker of the House of Commons, we make clear that some of the practices we've seen are tightened up in the rules and respond to the public concern.
The Labour leader was ready to outline his party's position this afternoon, only to have the Prime Minister make his announcement just moments before.
The Prime Minister's just written to the Speaker saying that MPs should be banned.
Labour have tabled a vote in the Commons on this tomorrow, and after hearing the Prime Minister had just made the announcement he was calling for, Keir Starmer claimed responsibility.
It is very obviously a concession to our vote tomorrow. It's in exactly the same terms as the binding vote tomorrow. This is a Prime Minister that had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, to do anything on standards in public life. Significant victory for the Labour Party.
Since the Tory MP Owen Paterson resigned after breaking lobbying rules, the government has been criticised, not just by the opposition, but MPs on its own benches, including from the former Prime Minister today.
The attempt by right honourable and honourable members of this House, aided and abetted by the government, under cover of reform of the process, effectively to clear his name, was misplaced, ill-judged and just plain wrong.
Debate in the Commons will continue tomorrow when MPs will decide what the limitations on second jobs should be and how new rules are enforced.
And Shihab is here now, tempted to say not a lot of love lost between Theresa May and her successor, but that's the subject of a different discussion. Look, a lot of people, I think, will be pleased to hear that there's going to be some clarity, but it feels like it's going to be really complicated.
Yeah, I was speaking to sources inside Number 10, and they were saying that these recommendations that they are putting forward, they are principles, they are a new way of doing politics, but it is ultimately up to MPs to determine how that will work, what the limitations on second jobs should be, how the mechanism to actually enforce it should work. Number 10 doesn't feel as though it's their responsibility to do that, but it's for across parties to ban second jobs. There is plenty of work to be done to determine what the nitty-gritty details of this will be. MPs will be going through that tomorrow when they debate it in the House of Commons, but it's going to take some time before a solution has come to.
OK, I feel it's a subject we'll be back to, but for now, Shihab, thank you very much indeed. So, still to come on tonight's News at 10. Justice for PC Yvonne Fletcher after a 37-year battle by her friend and colleague, and Beatlemania as you've never seen it before. Those stories and plenty more after this very short break. Welcome back. The Bank of England had put off any decision on raising interest rates 2 weeks ago. It was waiting for today's unemployment figures, and what they revealed makes a rise in rates that bit more likely. The jobs market is still doing okay. There is a record number of vacancies. The end of the furlough scheme hasn't led to large numbers of job losses. That means a rise in interest rates could bring down inflation without killing off the economic recovery.
In Southend-on-Sea, a recruitment fair is underway. The economy is awash with jobs, but some companies are struggling to get the staff they need.
There's a lot of competition because there is so much vacancy out there and people are creating roles, which is great for those who want work, but it does sometimes mean we don't get everyone come to us.
We've got different areas: cashiers, rides, catering, entertainment.
At the moment, it's an employees' market.
There's a lot more options than people think. I'm quite surprised when I look for work that there's like cleaning roles, there are like retail and everything.
The fear was that the end of the furlough scheme in September would trigger a wave of redundancies. It didn't. Indeed, the number of people on company payrolls rose by 160,000 in October, while the number of people claiming benefits fell by almost 15,000. The number of vacancies in the economy reached a new record high of almost 1.3 million. The Chancellor is feeling pleased.
Unemployment has consistently and continuously fallen for 9 months in a row now, and record numbers of people are in work, including, I can announce today, 100,000 young people who have started jobs through our Kickstart scheme. So that's all testament to our plan for jobs working.
Throughout the summer, a record number of people flowed into new jobs. But our island is being hit by high inflation. A global shortage of goods and labour is pushing up prices.
This looks like it could be a very difficult winter for lots of people's living standards. We've got pay growth, which is relatively weak compared to the price rises that people are seeing, and at the same time we're expecting inflation to rise further in the months ahead, and lots of families will be facing challenges in things like energy bills that particularly lower income households have to spend a larger proportion of their income on.
The Bank of England has signalled it's preparing to raise interest rates to contain inflation. It didn't do so earlier this month because it wanted to see what impact the end of furlough would have. The bank assumes that the vast majority of the 1 million people who were still furloughed when the scheme closed in September have remained in work. And the early signs are the bank is right.
It was awful. I hated every minute of it.
Joanne Potts spent 18 months on furlough. She's back selling holidays, but her employer in Oldham can only afford to pay her part-time.
You know, we're still not out of it. It's all well and good, everybody. Yes, you can go, you can do that. We're not out of it at all.
The success of the furlough scheme is cause for cheer. It also strengthens the case for an interest rate rise next month. Joel Hills, News at 10 in Southend-on-Sea.
Another inquiry has been launched this evening off the back of our 8-month-long investigation into Britain's housing crisis, this time by MPs. Members of the Housing and Local Government Committee say they want to examine the quality of social housing and the regulation of councils and housing associations. The MPs from all parties want to hear from people in difficulties who aren't getting the help they need. And if the evidence Daniel has been getting is anything to go by, and you will have seen many times, they could be sitting there about 10 years. So good luck to them. It's been an amazing investigation. Moving on, when WPC Yvonne Fletcher lay dying outside the Libyan embassy in London in 1984, her colleague and friend John Murray held her and made her a promise. He told her he would find those behind her fatal shooting. Well, today he came an awful lot closer to doing just that. In a civil case brought by Mr. Murray, a High Court judge found that a former advisor to Libya's Colonel Gaddafi was jointly liable.
For nearly 4 decades, John Murray has fought for justice for his former colleague, WPC Yvonne Fletcher. Today, he shed a tear as a Libyan man was held jointly liable for the fatal shooting outside the Libyan embassy.
This has been a battle lasting 37 years. It's a huge weight off my shoulders. My promise to Yvonne Fletcher as she lay dying to find those responsible for shooting has taken a huge step forward after all these years.
WPC Fletcher was in front of demonstrators when she was shot during anti-Gaddafi protests. The firing came from inside the embassy. John Murray cradled her as she lay dying. Salah Ibrahim Mabrouk was arrested in the UK in 2015, but 2 years later the case was dropped because crucial evidence could not be used on national security grounds. He denies the allegations in the Fletcher case. He wasn't the gunman, but today's civil case ruling found that his role in the overall plot meant he was jointly liable for the fatal shooting. At the place where the 25-year-old WPC fell, John Murray told me he hopes prosecutors will now reconsider bringing charges.
This is not the end, this is the beginning. Now the evidence is out there, it's in the public domain, people can make up their own minds. I will see Mr. Mabrouk in a criminal court standing trial for the murder of Yvonne Fletcher.
But while the chances of that seem remote, for now John Murray says today's ruling means Yvonne Fletcher can rest in peace after fulfilling the promise he made to her as she was dying. Neil Connery, News at 10.
Tempers along the freezing border between Belarus and Poland boiled over today. It started when migrants who've been allowed to gather on the Belarusian side tried to break through by throwing stones at the Polish border guards. They replied with tear gas and water cannon. Poland accused the Belarusian authorities of giving smoke grenades to the people trying to force their way across the border. Fresh from the climate conference in Glasgow, Prince Charles used his first royal tour since lockdown to share his long-held ideas on the environment in Jordan in the Middle East. Yes, it did involve flying, but it also involved sustainable jet fuel, a bit of an RAF first.
The COP26 climate change summit might be over, but as Prince Charles and Camilla began a royal tour today, the first since the pandemic wave has dramatically reduced. There was just enough holy water for the couple to touch, but this country could run out of water, holy or not, in the next 2 decades. Jordan's Queen Rania acknowledged the alarming scarcity of water here when she spoke to ITV News today.
Here in Jordan, we're considered the second most water-scarce country in the world, and dwindling rainfall still hits us where it hurts. The prognosis here in the Middle East is quite dire. So in our region, we're expecting warming to be at double the global average, with temperatures probably increasing up to 4 degrees centigrade by 2050.
As Prince Charles meets heads of state on this tour, like King Abdullah, he is determined to keep the climate crisis high on the agenda, and his decades of campaigning on it has not gone unnoticed.
I'm just glad that people have actually started to understand what he's been saying for so long and to understand the urgency of his words, and I think he's a leading figure in the fight for our planet.
The British and Jordanian royals are very close. Camilla even got a lift in Queen Rania's electric car. And this queen sent her best wishes today to our queen after her recent poor health.
Have you had an opportunity to express your good wishes to her through Prince Charles?
Of course, and you know, she's somebody we hold in really high regard, and she's somebody I look up to personally. We're always concerned for her health, but she's a strong woman, you know, and she, even at this age, is very active. We can all just hope to be as active as she is at that age. So, you know, our best wishes are always to her, and hopefully she'll have many more years ahead of her.
Given the Queen has now cancelled several engagements on doctor's orders, Prince Charles spoke to his mother before he left for Jordan and Egypt this week. Chris Ship, News at 10, Amman, Jordan.
Finally, conventional wisdom about the Beatles suggests that the build-up to their final live show and album was a little short on harmony, but a long-awaited documentary shows the world's most famous pop group pulling together and getting on as they raced against time to meet a deadline. The documentary had its first showing this evening.
Well, two people should have bass and guitar.
Maybe we should learn a few songs.
The images are crystal clear. They were recorded more than 5 decades ago. An astonishing look at the world's most famous band creating what would become their last studio album to be released.
Morning, everybody. Another bright day. Morning, Cameron.
John, Paul, Ringo and George had agreed to be filmed in 1969 as they wrote and recorded new tracks, which resulted in a feature-length film and an album, both called Let It Be.
We're bloody stars, you know.
But nearly 60 hours of footage and 150 hours of audio were never used, most of it lying in a vault until now. Newly restored by the director Peter Jackson, it forms 3 two-hour documentaries. It has the backing of Sir Paul McCartney, who alongside daughter Mary attended tonight's VIP screening with other family members and famous fans.
When you see Peter's footage all rezzed up, it blew my mind when I first saw John singing, and I was like, John had gold teeth? Do you know what I mean? It's something you don't think of. You know, you see him singing and you can see he's got a gold crown.
Anytime I see my dad on TV, I get very misty because of what he achieved and where he came from, and that he changed the world. Right? And but really, he's just my dad.
When the announcement was made, it was like, what? There's 60 hours of footage, the Beatles that we've never seen. So it's going to be amazing. I'm sure I'll shed a little tear towards the end of it.
The Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson, who'd previously restored World War I footage, took 4 years to do the same with the Beatles archive, documenting the process.
So here we are. We've got 56 hours of never-before-seen Beatles footage, and it's really, it's great stuff.
The original documentary, released in 1970, is regarded as an unhappy testimony of a band breaking up. This one, though, clearly shows the session was often full of laughter and warmth, and producer George Martin's son has more cause than most to be grateful.
I was born on October 9th, 1969. I was conceived during this period, and so I'm trying to work out when he's got a smile on his face.
You are a child of this documentary, aren't you?
I'm born from this documentary, I am, yeah.
The ultimate aim of the reunion had been for the band to perform a big live concert at the end. In the event, they simply went to the rooftop of their Apple studios
Today
and gave the world perhaps the most
at
iconic
a critical
gig
time
in
the history of Northern Ireland. We talked to
The Beatles may have broken up in 1970, but the world remains ever hungry for more. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
Makes you wonder, but for John's tragic death, would they have played again one day? That's it for tonight. Good night. Thanks for watching.